Grace Morrison had never intended to live a life this quiet. At 35, she should have been celebrating milestones, promotions, vacations, family gatherings. Instead, her days blurred together in the muted corners of her bookstore, tucked away in a quiet street of Boston. The shop was her sanctuary, its dusty shelves and cozy reading corners a refuge from the world she once craved but now feared. Alex Carter was a man on the run from his own ghosts. A journalist who had once been celebrated for his fearless exposés, he now found himself navigating the aftermath of a tragedy he rarely spoke of. Moving to Boston was supposed to be a fresh start, a city big enough to lose himself in, yet small enough to feel the hum of life again. Their paths crossed on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Grace, locking up the bookstore early to escape the storm, almost collided with Alex as he ducked into the awning for shelter. "I'm sorry," they said in unison, their laughter breaking the awkward tension. Grace glanced at him, noticing the rain-soaked notebook in his hand. "You're a writer?" she asked, gesturing toward the pages. "Something like that," Alex replied with a hesitant smile. What began as a brief exchange stretched into a coffee shared at the cafe next door. For Grace, Alex's dry humor and easy charm were a welcome distraction from her guarded solitude. For Alex, Grace's quiet warmth felt like an anchor in the storm. Over the weeks, Grace and Alex's connection deepened. Late-night conversations over tea turned into long walks by the river, their shared silences as comforting as their words. Grace found herself opening up about her failed marriage, how the man she once loved had turned distant and cold. Alex, in turn, shared pieces of his story, enough to build trust, but never the full picture. "I've lost people too," he admitted one evening, his voice barely above a whisper. "It changes you." Grace didn't press him for details. Instead, she reached for his hand, offering a quiet reassurance that he didn't need to face his pain alone. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to imagine a future. One where love wasn't a risk, but a chance worth taking. Just as their lives began to intertwine, the past Alex had carefully avoided began to surface. His estranged brother, Michael, arrived in Boston unannounced, bringing with him the same charisma that had always overshadowed Alex. Michael was everything Alex wasn't: bold, reckless, and endlessly charming. Grace met him during a casual dinner Alex hosted. At first, it was just polite conversation, but Michael's compliments toward Grace grew more pointed, his glances lingering a moment too long. Alex brushed it off, telling himself he was overreacting. But as weeks passed, he noticed small changes in Grace. She seemed distracted, often lost in thought, and her usual warmth toward him felt distant. One evening, Alex found a note tucked into his notebook, written in Grace's handwriting. "We need to talk." His heart sank as he read the words, sensing what was coming before it was spoken. When Grace finally confessed, her voice was shaking, her eyes filled with guilt. "I didn't mean for this to happen," she said. "But Michael and it just happened." Alex's world shattered in that moment. The brother who had already taken so much from him had now taken the one person who made him believe in love again. Months passed, and Alex tried to rebuild his life. He threw himself into his work, avoiding all thoughts of Grace and Michael. Then, one evening, he received a call he never expected. It was Grace. Her voice was frantic, barely coherent. "I didn't know who else to call," she said between sobs. "I'm pregnant, but something's wrong." Alex rushed to the hospital, his heart pounding. When he arrived, he found Grace pale and weak, her hand resting protectively over her stomach. She had miscarried. "I thought it was his," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "But the doctor said it might have been yours." Alex felt a mixture of heartbreak and confusion. The child that might have been his was gone, along with the chance for closure he never realized he needed. The hospital room was eerily silent, broken only by the faint hum of the machines and the muffled footsteps of nurses passing in the hall. Grace lay motionless, her face turned toward the window, where raindrops traced chaotic patterns on the glass. She hadn't spoken since the doctor delivered the news. The baby she hadn't even had time to accept was gone. Alex sat in the corner, his hands gripping the arms of the chair so tightly his knuckles turned white. He had come here out of instinct, a part of him still tethered to Grace despite everything she had done. But now, sitting in the suffocating silence of her grief, He felt more like a ghost than a man. "Why are you here, Alex?" Grace's voice finally broke the quiet, barely above a whisper. She didn't look at him, her gaze fixed on the storm outside. "You shouldn't have come." "I didn't know where else to go," Alex admitted, his voice raw. "When you called, I couldn't just ignore it." Grace let out a hollow laugh, bitter and filled with self-loathing. "You should have. I don't deserve your kindness after what I did to you." Her words cut deep, but Alex couldn't deny the truth in them. He wanted to yell, to demand answers, to unload the storm of anger and heartbreak that had been festering since the night she chose his brother. But sitting here, seeing her broken in a way he'd never imagined, all he felt was an aching emptiness. As the storm outside intensified, so did the tempest in Alex's mind. Memories of the past clawed their way to the surface, their late-night talks, the way Grace's laughter could light up the darkest of his days, and the first time she had kissed him under the same rain now battering the hospital windows. "I need to know, Grace," Alex finally said, his voice trembling. "Why him? Why my brother after everything we had?" Grace turned to face him, her expression a mixture of shame and sorrow. "Because he made me feel different, special, in a way I didn't think I deserved. You gave me stability, Alex, but he gave me escape." Her confession landed like a blow, but Alex noticed something else, a flicker of regret buried beneath her words. He leaned forward, his voice low but firm. "And where did that escape lead you? To this? To losing everything?" Grace's lip quivered, but she said nothing, turning her gaze back to the window. Alex stood, pacing the room as the weight of it all pressed down on him. Then, as if struck by a sudden thought, he froze. "The child," he said, his voice barely audible. "You said it might have been mine." Grace closed her eyes, tears streaming silently down her face. "I'll never know," she whispered, "and now neither will you." 2 days later, Alex was back in his apartment when there was a loud knock on the door. He hesitated, his chest tightening with an all-too-familiar dread. When he opened it, there stood Michael, his brother's smug confidence replaced with a look of desperation. "We need to talk," Michael said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. Alex clenched his fists, the urge to strike his brother overwhelming. "Talk? Now you want to talk? After you destroyed everything I cared about?" Michael flinched, but his expression hardened. "You think I planned this? That I woke up one day and decided to take her from you? It wasn't like that." "No," Alex spat. "It was worse. You took advantage of her, of me, and now look where it's gotten you. Was it worth it, Michael?" Michael's jaw tightened, and for a moment Alex thought he might leave. But instead, Michael surprised him. "No, it wasn't. I thought I loved her, Alex. But all I did was ruin her life. And yours. And now..." He hesitated, running a hand through his hair. "Now I don't even know who I am anymore." Alex stared at his brother, torn between the hatred he had carried for months and the faint echo of the bond they once shared. "You're a coward," he finally said. "But so am I, for letting you back in here." Michael's shoulders slumped, the weight of his actions finally breaking through. "I'm leaving town," he said quietly. "I thought you should know. Grace, she doesn't want to see me. She doesn't want to see anyone." As Michael turned to leave, Alex called after him. "If you go, don't come back. Not until you've figured out how to be the man you used to be." Michael paused, his hand on the doorknob. "The man I used to be is gone, Alex, just like everything else." The days after Michael's departure were a blur for Alex. His apartment, once a quiet sanctuary, now felt suffocating, filled with memories he couldn't escape. Everywhere he turned, he saw pieces of his shattered life. Grace's scarf draped over a chair, Michael's old notebook still lying on the shelf. Unable to sit with his thoughts, Alex returned to his work, taking on freelance assignments that kept him moving from one place to another. But no matter where he went, the echoes of his past followed. He saw Grace in every bookstore he passed, heard Michael's voice in every crowded cafe. A message from Grace? One evening, just as Alex was about to collapse into bed, his phone buzzed. The screen lit up with a name he hadn't seen in weeks. "Grace, I'm leaving the city. I thought you should know." The message was short, almost clinical, but it struck Alex like a thunderbolt. He stared at the words, his mind racing. Was this goodbye? A plea for him to stop her? Or simply a courtesy, one last gesture of closure? Against his better judgment, he replied, "Can we meet just once before you go?" Her response came quickly. "Tomorrow, 8 p.m., the pier." The pier was deserted when Alex arrived, the cold wind biting at his skin. He spotted Grace near the edge, her coat wrapped tightly around her. For a moment he hesitated, watching her silhouette against the inky black water. When he approached, she turned, her face pale but composed. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "I wasn't sure I should," Alex admitted. They stood in silence, the sound of waves crashing against the rocks filling the void. Finally, Grace spoke, her voice steady but tinged with sorrow. "I'm sorry for everything, Alex. For Michael, for the baby, for all the ways I failed you." Alex clenched his fists, the familiar anger bubbling to the surface. "You didn't just fail me, Grace. You broke me. You broke us." Her eyes filled with tears, but she didn't look away. "I know, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life. But you deserve more than my regret. You deserve to heal." Alex took a deep breath, the weight of her words sinking in. "And what about you? Do you think leaving will fix this?" "Fix you?" Grace shook her head, a bitter smile crossing her lips. "I don't know, but staying here, staying in the place where I've caused so much pain, it feels like the only way I can make things right is to let you go." A moment of release. For the first time in months, Alex felt something shift inside him. The anger, the bitterness, the relentless ache. It was still there, but it no longer consumed him. He looked at Grace, seeing not the woman who had betrayed him, but someone just as lost and broken as he had been. "I don't forgive you," he said, his voice firm but without malice. "Not yet. Maybe not ever. But I hope you find whatever it is you're looking for." Grace nodded, her tears falling freely now. "I hope you do too, Alex." Without another word, she turned and walked away, disappearing into the darkness. Alex stood there for a long time, the cold wind wrapping around him like a shroud. And for the first time, he felt the faintest hint of freedom, a sense that maybe, just maybe, he could finally begin to rebuild. The weeks after Grace's departure were anything but easy. Alex found himself swinging between moments of quiet acceptance and waves of overwhelming sadness. The apartment felt both too empty and too full, every corner a reminder of the life he had lost. He boxed up the remnants of his past, Grace's forgotten scarf, Michael's notebook, even the book of poetry he once loved but couldn't bear to read anymore. Each item went into storage, not out of anger but as a step toward letting go. Alex knew that moving forward didn't mean erasing the past. It meant learning to live with it. One evening, while walking along the river, he stopped at a small street performance. A violinist played a haunting melody, the notes floating on the crisp autumn air. Alex closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him. For the first time, he didn't feel like he was drowning in his grief. Instead, it felt like the beginning of something. Not joy, not yet, but perhaps a truce with himself. The turning point came unexpectedly. Alex had been invited to a gallery opening by a colleague, a favor he accepted more out of obligation than enthusiasm. The space buzzed with quiet chatter, the walls adorned with photographs capturing moments of raw humanity, a child's laughter in the rain, an elderly couple dancing in their living room, the silhouette of a lone traveler against a golden horizon. One series in particular caught Alex's eye. Black and white portraits of hands, a farmer's calloused fingers gripping soil, a pianist's delicate touch on the keys, a young boy's small hand clutching a toy. The images spoke of work, play, and hope, all in equal measure. "You're drawn to these too, huh?" Alex turned to see a woman standing beside him, her dark curls spilling over her shoulders, her smile soft but curious. "They're powerful," Alex said, gesturing to the photographs. "I think it's the simplicity. Just hands, but they say so much." She nodded, her eyes lingering on the images. "That's what I love about photography. It strips away everything unnecessary and leaves you with the truth." For the first time in a long while, Alex felt himself smile without effort. "I'm Alex," he said, offering his hand. "Evelyn," she replied, her handshake warm and sure. Their conversation started with art, but meandered through other topics. Favorite cities, books that stayed with them, the little quirks of life they found amusing. Evelyn's laugh was light but full, and her presence lacked the intensity Alex had grown used to in his past relationships. She didn't demand answers or pry into his silence. Instead, she simply existed alongside him, allowing him to be as he was. Over the next few months, Alex and Evelyn crossed paths more frequently. At first, it was purely coincidental. A shared coffee shop, a random lecture they both attended. But soon, their meetings became intentional. They started sharing walks, dinners, and stories about their lives. Hers filled with tales of curating exhibitions, his with the struggles and triumphs of writing for change. Evelyn's presence was a stark contrast to Grace's. Where Grace had been a whirlwind, Evelyn was steady. Where Grace had drawn Alex into the depths of his emotions, Evelyn allowed him to explore them at his own pace. Slowly, Alex began to trust again, not just in others, but in himself. One cool spring evening, Alex found himself standing on the hill overlooking the city. It was a place he had come to often in his darkest moments, searching for clarity in the sprawling lights below. This time, though, the view felt different. He thought of Grace, of Michael, of the child that might have been his. The pain was still there, but it no longer consumed him. Instead, it sat quietly in the background, a reminder of how far he had come. Then he thought of Evelyn, her quiet laugh, the way she listened without judgment, the moments of calm she brought into his life. She wasn't a replacement for what he had lost, nor was she a cure for his scars. She was simply Evelyn, and that was enough. As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and gold, Alex let out a long breath. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time, he wasn't afraid. Life had broken Alex in ways he hadn't thought possible, but it was through those fractures that he had found his strength. The people who had hurt him, the love he had lost, and the dreams that had slipped away, they were all part of his story, but they didn't define him. Alex learned that healing wasn't about forgetting the past. It was about carrying it with him, not as a burden, but as a testament to his resilience. He understood now that love wasn't about perfection or certainty. It was about showing up, even when it was hard. And as he